Okay, so let's unpack this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we've got this stack of notes, reflections, articles here.
Right.
And it's all swirling around something that, well, we all deal with, you know,
Absolutely.
but maybe don't talk about clearly enough. That line between just needing to blow off steam.
Yeah, and when it tips over.
Exactly. When it falls into that gossip trap.
Mm-hmm.
We're digging into this because you, our listener, you sent over this source material. You're looking for like a clearer path through this really common, often messy social stuff.
Yeah, it is messy.
How do we actually do venting and listening in a way that feels okay? You know, what's the real line between healthy emotional processing and harmful gossip?
Right.
So think of this deep dive as maybe a shortcut, helping you navigate those tricky conversations with a bit more awareness.
And what's fascinating here, I think, is just how baked in venting and gossip feel in our daily interactions. It's everywhere. So figuring out the difference isn't just like some academic exercise. It's actually critical for building relationships that feel safe and for understanding ourselves better, really, our own motivations.
Okay, so let's jump right in then. The core confusion seems to be, well, on the surface, they look pretty similar, right?
They do.
You're talking about someone who isn't in the room.
Absolutely. That's the easy part to see. But the fundamental difference, and these notes really hammer this home, it comes down to intent.
Intent. Oh,
Yeah. Why are you talking? Venting, when it's healthy, is about your self-regulation. It's about expressing your emotions to process your experience.
right. It's internal.
Exactly. Gossip, though, that's usually driven by something else, wanting to entertain, maybe bond through negativity, or sometimes just past judgment.
And that intention, that why, it shapes everything else, doesn't it? The material points out how it shows up in the framing.
Mm-hmm.
Like healthy venting tends to be very I-focused. I felt hurt when this happened, or this situation made me feel really frustrated. It's rooted in your internal landscape.
Exactly. Whereas gossip flips the script. It's externally focused. Did you hear what they did?
Right. Or she's always like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's often a description or judgment of the other person's actions, their character, usually, without much nuance.
There's also a difference in the audience, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, you vent to someone you really trust, often in private.
Right. A safe space.
But gossip. Gossip tends to spill out into wider networks, right?
Yeah.
Maybe people who aren't even connected to this situation.
Yeah. Less trusted circles, sometimes even strangers online. And the impact is totally different, too. Healthy venting is often aiming for relief, maybe getting some perspective.
Figuring out what to do next, maybe.
Yeah, maybe even getting feedback. Gossip. Well, it often just solidifies biases, creates these little us versus them alliances.
Or it's just entertainment,
Yeah.
right? To someone else's expense.
Pretty much. But, and this is important, the notes are very clear, this line is incredibly blurry in practice.
Yeah, that's the tricky part.
Especially when the venting becomes chronic or really one-sided or it gets harsh. Even if you started just trying to process your feelings, if it ends up damaging someone's reputation, well, you've likely crossed that line.
Okay, so that raises a really key question then. For the person who needs to vent, and let's face it, that's most of us sometimes, how do you do it ethically?
Right.
When does that emotional release become something less healthy?
Because feeling frustrated, needing to talk things out, that's completely normal,
Right.
especially in close relationships. The material offers some really concrete, healthy practices. First one, name your actual emotion.
Okay.
Just saying, I feel angry and confused is miles away from saying they're such a terrible person. Focus on your feeling, not slapping a label on them.
Yes, and framing it as your subjective experience. That seems crucial.
Yeah.
This isn't objective fact about the other person.
Oh.
It's your perception of a situation. And choosing your listener wisely, that's a big one.
Huge. Find someone you won't just pour gasoline on the fire or, go share it wider.
Right.
Venting, ideally, should be a tool for understanding yourself and your reaction, not a weapon to punish someone else or, build your case against them.
Yeah.
And the notes suggest trying to balance it with compassion, even just a little bit. Look, I know they're probably having a hard time, and what happens still really frustrated me.
Holding both things, their humanity and your pain.
Exactly. Holding space for both.
Okay, now what about the red flags, the warning signs that maybe you're sliding into harmful territory?
Yeah, good question. Repeatedly going over the exact same complaint without any sense of movement or seeking a solution. That's one.
Like you're stuck in a loop.
Totally stuck. Also, using the venting to actively gather people to your side. Rally the troops.
We're trying to subtly, or maybe not so subtly, exclude someone socially.
That's a big red flag. And let's be honest, releasing your emotional pressure but at the direct expense of someone else's dignity or reputation, that's pretty clearly over the line.
The material offers these two incredibly powerful self-reflection questions here. Things you can ask yourself right in the moment.
The gut checks.
First, would I say this if they were actually in the room? And second, what is my true goal in saying this right now? Like, what am I really trying to achieve?
Right.
If the answer to that first one is absolutely not, or if your goal sounds anything like make them look bad or get people on my side against them,
You're almost certainly entering gossip territory.
Yeah.
Those are key tools for the listener for you to check your own venting.
okay, let's flip the script. What about when you're the person on the listening end? Material points out you actually hold a significant amount of power here,
You really do.
not just over this specific conversation, but potentially over the future of the relationships involved.
Absolutely. Your role isn't just to sit there and soak it up like a sponge. You can actually steer the conversation.
Oh. What are the healthy listener practices?
Well, one big one is validating the feeling without necessarily validating the narrative or the judgment.
Okay, what does that look like?
Like saying, wow, this sounds incredibly difficult, or I can hear how upset you are. That validates their struggle. But saying, ugh, they're the absolute worst. Well, that just fuels the fire.
Right, empathy over shared outrage.
Exactly. Empathy over outrage. And you can ask questions that gently encourage reflection or maybe nudge towards a solution. Instead of just agreeing, maybe ask.
Like, have you thought about talking to them directly about this?
Perfect. Or what do you feel like you actually need from me right now by sharing this?
Setting boundaries is also crucial, isn't it? That's okay to say something like,
Hey, I want to be here for you, but I'm also not comfortable just, tearing down someone who isn't here to share their side.
yeah. And resist the urge to just passively agree, because that can make the venter's subjective story feel like it's objective fact.
Right. And if it feels appropriate, you could gently encourage exploring ways to repair the situation.
So how do you know when your listening has crossed that line into enabling? When are you actually making it worse?
Good question. The material lists some signs. Like you stay silent when someone is clearly just assassinating someone's character.
Or you participate,
Yeah.
maybe just because it's entertaining, or it feels like the way to belong in that group chat or conversation.
Yeah. Or you don't stop to consider the ethics of potentially retelling what you're hearing later on, spreading it further.
And that feeling afterwards,
Yeah.
feeling drained or kind of gross or somehow complicit.
That's a really common signal, yeah. So being a good listener in these situations means being an active guide, ideally towards clarity and compassion, not just being a passive sponge for all the negativity.
Okay, shifting gears again, this is a really tough one. What about when you find out you're the one being talked about?
Oh, that's rough.
The notes acknowledge how incredibly painful and confusing that is. Destabilizing even, especially if it comes from people you thought you trusted.
Yeah, it brings up so much. Anger, betrayal, maybe shame, self-doubt.
All of it. So what do you do? The material offers some steps to consider.
First step, pause and assess. Just take a breath. Try to get some context if you can. Is this really malicious gossip? Or could it be something less intentional? Maybe someone was just venting messily.
And it got shared in a way they didn't intend.
Exactly. Try not to jump to the worst conclusion immediately. Then you have to decide whether to confront.
That feels like a big decision.
It is. If it's a relationship you actually value and, generally trust, the notes offer a potential phrase. It's direct, but not accusatory. Something like,
Hey, I heard you might have been frustrated about something I did. Could we possibly talk about it directly?
right. It opens the door for dialogue rather than just sparking a bigger fight.
But crucially, the material also says, if the relationship isn't safe, or maybe it's just not that important to you.
Then sometimes putting distance is actually the healthier option. Confronting might just make things worse or escalate things unnecessarily.
There's also a step about checking in with yourself, looking inward.
Yeah. Asking yourself honestly, is there any kernel of truth, even a tiny one, in what was said? Doesn't mean it justifies the gossip, but is there something to learn?
And trying to figure out, is this gossip really about me? Or is it more a reflection of their issues, their character, their own stuff?
That's a really important discernment, and the material is very firm on this next point. Do not counter gossip.
Resist the urge to retaliate.
Absolutely. It just drags you down into the same mud, makes the whole problem deeper and wider. The key point here is powerful. Gossip often reveals far more about the gossiper, their insecurities, their judgments, their worldview, than it does about the person they're actually talking about, especially when it lacks nuance or compassion.
It feels like all these dynamics, whether you're the one venting, the one listening, or the one being talked about, they're all part of this larger social ecosystem we live in.
Exactly. We all play these roles at different times.
And the notes make a case for trying to cultivate a more ethical culture within that ecosystem.
Yeah, and it comes down to some foundational pieces, things like emotional literacy, just being able to name your feelings without necessarily assigning blame.
Mature boundaries, understanding that maybe not every single feeling needs to be aired publicly.
Truth with care, realizing that honesty isn't a license to just wound people.
And cultivating real circles of trust, knowing who you can share with safely, knowing where your words will actually be held with respect.
The challenge isn't necessarily to eliminate venting altogether, because sometimes we need it. It's about trying to make it more ethical, honoring everyone's humanity, including your own.
So the material gives us these key variables to check in with before we start venting, like a little checklist.
Right. First,
Yeah.
what's the actual purpose? Is it genuinely for relief, clarity, getting feedback, or is it maybe subtly about validating a bias you have or even manipulating the situation?
Okay, then, who is your audience? Is this a truly safe confidant? Or is it someone you kind of know loves drama or might spread it?
Big difference then. What's the framing? Is it focused on your feelings and experience? Or is it just turning into a laundry list of someone else's perceived failings?
And finally, frequency and intensity. Is this a rare, intense moment because something big happened? Or is this becoming a constant drip, drip, drip of bitterness about the same person or situation?
Yeah, asking those questions up front can make a huge difference.
The notes then apply these checks to common areas where venting happens, like coworkers or bosses.
Right. Healthy venting might be sharing your frustration privately with a trusted friend outside of work, focusing on the impact it's having on you.
Harmful would be, what, complaining constantly in the office, maybe online, damaging their reputation.
Exactly. The tip there is keep it confidential if possible, and focus on the impact on your work or your feelings, not just resorting to insults about them.
What about friends? That feels really delicate.
It is. Healthy could be talking through hurt or disappointment to understand it, maybe with the goal of eventually repairing things with the friend, or processing it with another friend who is genuinely supportive and discreet.
And harmful.
Harmful is often triangulation, trying to turn one friend against another, or using the group chat like a courtroom to get everyone on your side against the other friend.
Yeah, that doesn't usually end well.
No. The tip is, if you're not willing to eventually talk to the friend directly about the core issue, you really need to question your actual goal in venting about them to others.
Okay, family, that's another big one.
Huge. Processing complex family dynamics or frustrations with a therapist, or maybe a really trusted, emotionally mature friend, that can be healthy. It helps you understand yourself.
But harmful would be public rants or constantly retelling a victim narrative that just paints complex family members as one-dimensional villains.
Right. The tip here is similar. This kind of venting should ideally serve your growth and healing, not just cement resentment against them or replace doing the actual work.
What about significant others or exes?
Healthy. Expressing real-time struggles to a trusted friend or counselor as you navigate issues, or respectfully processing a breakup to get support.
Harmful. Regularly airing intimate details, especially online, or constantly degrading your partner or ex to basically anyone who will listen.
Exactly. The tip. If you're constantly venting about issues in a current relationship, but seem unwilling to either talk to them about it or maybe even leave the relationship, the venting might be serving as an avoidance strategy.
That's insightful. Then there's children or parenting.
Yeah, healthy is sharing the real stress and overwhelm of parenting with other parents you trust or a therapist without shame. It's hard.
Harmful is like publicly mocking or demeaning your child or projecting adult-level blame or motives onto them when they're just being kids.
Right. The tip. Venting with love and respect is possible. Avoid saying things about your child that you wouldn't want them to overhear or ever know you felt so harshly.
Okay, venting about yourself. Can that be harmful?
It can. Healthy is sharing your struggles with vulnerability and self-compassion, maybe with a supportive person or therapist. Harmful is engaging in really harsh self-talk disguised as brutal honesty, or getting stuck in these I suck loops that just Avoid taking responsibility or finding solutions.
So the tip is, yes, you deserve support, but don't let venting about yourself just reinforce your most negative self-narrative.
Exactly. And finally, talking about your parents as an adult child.
Healthy is maybe processing your upbringing to understand how it shaped you, gaining insights that help you set boundaries now, or maybe even repair relationships if that's possible and desired.
And harmful is constantly blaming your parents for absolutely everything in your adult life, or reducing them to these cartoon villains without any nuance.
So again, the tip is, this kind of processing should serve your growth and healing, not just keep you stuck in resentment forever.
Right.
The material really seems to bring it all together with some powerful general rules of thumb, almost like a final checklist before you decide to speak.
Yeah, these are good. First, is this primarily about seeking clarity for yourself, or is it maybe leaning toward punishment for them?
Second, would I be willing to say this directly to the person if they were here? That gut check again.
Third, am I genuinely seeking help or feedback? Or am I maybe just looking for validation of a pre-existing bias I have against someone?
Fourth, is this a one-off moment of intense feeling because something specific happened, or is this becoming a pattern of repetitive complaint?
And finally, maybe the biggest one. Does this act of venting actually help me grow or move forward? Or does it just keep me stuck in the problem?
Wow, those are really clarifying questions.
They are. And it's interesting because, as the notes point out, most people who vent are probably just trying to feel seen and understood. That's a very human need.
But that line between getting validation, which can be helpful, and just getting enabled.
It can be incredibly thin, especially if the venting just reinforces destructive patterns or helps you avoid taking responsibility for your part in things.
So when you're the listener, you're not there to, police someone's pain.
Yeah, definitely not.
But you can gently try to anchor the conversation if it starts drifting away from processing and growth and towards actual harm or just spinning wheels.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance.
Okay, but let's get deeper. Why do we even do this in the first place? What's going on underneath the surface? This is where the notes get really interesting, I think.
Yeah, the psychology behind it is fascinating. It starts with what they call the relief trap.
The relief trap.
Venting feels good in the moment, right? Often, because it triggers co-regulation, you release some tension by being seen, heard, affirmed by someone else. That feels good.
Sure. Connection.
But here's the tricky part. Your brain doesn't always clearly distinguish between truly processing an emotion and just rehearsing the story of that emotion.
Ah, okay. So repeating the story isn't the same as working through the feeling.
Not necessarily. If you vent the same complaint or story over and over, you might not be processing it at all. You could actually be training your brain to stay anchored to that negative emotion, maybe even building an identity around being wronged.
And avoiding dealing with the actual situation.
Potentially, yeah. Avoiding taking vulnerable action by just staying safe inside the narrative you keep telling.
So the key takeaway here is, if chronic venting is your go-to,
It might signal that you're trying to resolve an internal conflict by constantly talking about it externally, without actually engaging the part of you that could initiate real change or take a different action.
that's powerful. Let's revisit the venting versus gossip distinction now, with this deeper psychological lens.
Right. Venting, at its core, is trying to discharge your pain, your internal experience. Gossip is often trying to shape social power-building alliances, maybe excluding others.
So venting is self-focused. This is what I felt.
Gossip shifts the focus squarely onto the other person. This is what they did, often reducing them to a caricature, losing the complexity.
And the insight here is,
Venting tips into gossip when your personal pain isn't just your story anymore, but it morphs into defining someone else's fixed persona. And often in that moment, you lose curiosity about their complexity, their humanity.
because it's easier to bond over outrage.
It's faster, certainly. Bonding over shared outrage often happens much quicker than bonding over shared nuance or shared vulnerability. It's just a fact of human social dynamics.
This seems to tie directly into judgment and identity.
Absolutely. If your venting is a constant stream of criticism or complaint about others, the notes suggest asking yourself, do you only feel emotionally real or validated when you're feeling hurt or wronged?
Or is complaining about others maybe a primary way you express your identity,
Yeah.
defining yourself by what you're against?
Exactly. The material points out that chronic venting rooted in judgment can actually train your perception to constantly scan for flaws, betrayals, or threats in others, rather than seeing the full complex picture. You start to expect the worst.
So it becomes a self-reinforcing loop.
Totally. The key idea here is that habitual venting can be a sign of a worldview under strain, a struggle between the self you aspire to be and the world you feel stuck navigating. It can become almost like a personal propaganda machine.
Prioritizing the emotional safety of your narrative over actually seeing the situation or the people involved accurately.
Precisely.
And there's a nervous system pattern piece to this too, right? Like a biological loop.
Definitely. Think about the cycle. Stress builds up, you feel tension in your body, you tell the story to someone, you get that little hit of release or validation.
Ah, the relief.
That little wave of relief reinforces the behavior. Even if the situation you're complaining about hasn't actually changed at all, the material suggests this can become a dopamine loop, almost like a somatic addiction.
Meaning your body and nervous system get conditioned to seek that specific stress release cycle through talking about it.
Exactly. So the insight here is that breaking this cycle isn't just about willpower or setting better boundaries. It often requires building entirely new nervous system pathways for regulating your stress and emotions without immediately needing to externalize through venting, finding other ways to soothe yourself.
The notes also touch on venting as resistance to grief. How does that work?
Well, think about a lot of the common triggers for venting, feeling disappointed, betrayed, things not working out as you hoped.
Those are all forms of loss, aren't they?
Exactly. They involve grieving the version of reality you wanted or expected but didn't get. And unprocessed grief can easily get transmuted into other things: anger, sarcasm, a strong need for moral clarity and judgment.
All things that fuel the venting cycle.
Right. Venting about your demanding boss. Maybe underneath there's grief about a lost sense of purpose or autonomy at work, complaining endlessly about a friend who let you down. Could there be grief over the friendship evolving or growing apart?
So the core insight here is that the real antidote might not just be setting boundaries or reframing the situation.
It could be allowing yourself to actually grieve the version of the life or the relationship or the situation that you wished existed but doesn't. Acknowledging the loss.
Wow. So looking at chronic venting through this deeper psychological lens, it can reveal a lot about what's going on inside us.
For sure. Maybe unhonored boundaries you haven't actually enforced yet. Unprocessed resentment you're holding on to. A feeling of losing agency where venting gives you this illusion of control.
Or maybe a need for closeness that you only know how to meet through complaining with someone about a third party, that triangulation thing.
Yeah. Or sometimes simply a deep fear of direct confrontation. So the fundamental insight is that venting is often an adaptive tool, maybe not the healthiest one, but adaptive that you're using to meet a deeper, perhaps unconscious need.
So the work becomes, what is that need underneath the story I keep telling?
Exactly. And could I meet it through a more direct or courageous or healthier path?
Okay, so if venting has become this default habit, maybe even a compulsion for someone, how do you actually shift towards something more conscious and connected? What are the practical steps?
The material offers some really good ones for building new muscles here. The first step is crucial: developing self-regulation tools before you immediately externalize the feeling. Create a buffer.
A buffer between the trigger and the reaction. What does that look like?
Simple things, actually, like just name the emotion internally without adding the whole narrative yet. Just, okay, I feel frustrated, instead of launching into, my boss is being a total jerk again, and here's why.
Got it. Just the feeling.
Yeah. Practice somatic awareness. Literally check in with your body. Where are you holding tension? Shoulders, jaw, stomach? How does this feeling physically manifest? Simple breath work or grounding exercises can help regulate the nervous system right there in the moment.
Private journaling is powerful too, right? Just getting it all out on the page first.
Hugely powerful. Spill it all out privately first. And a big one the notes mention: delay response. Give yourself 15 or 20 minutes, maybe even longer, before you share the story with someone else.
Let the initial emotional wave pass a bit.
Exactly. Ask yourself again after that buffer: does this still feel urgent? Does it still need to be said? And if so, can I say it differently now? Maybe more calmly or clearly? This helps you respond from a place of awareness, not just knee-jerk reaction.
What about when you do decide to share? The material talks about conscious externalizing.
Right. If you are going to vent, reframe it. Think of it as an intentional, maybe temporary emotional outsourcing. Set an intention before you start talking.
Like asking yourself, am I seeking relief right now?
Mm-hmm.
Clarity, feedback, or do I just need a little space to process this out loud?
Exactly. And maybe own your part in the situation, even briefly. I know I'm probably contributing to this dynamic somehow. Something like that shows self-awareness.
And signaling to your listener
Yeah.
what you don't want them to do.
Yeah, like, hey, I just need to get this off my chest for a minute. Please don't let this turn into full-on gossip, or I'm not looking for you to hate them too, just to listen.
And maybe circling back later.
Yeah, perhaps with a brief reflection. Hey, I was thinking more about what I shared earlier. It just makes the whole venting process feel more conscious, more self-aware, less reactive.
The notes also touch on something interesting called neutral gossip versus ethical awareness. What's that about?
Well, we all sometimes share seemingly harmless information about others, right? Who broke up, who got a new job, news about neighbors. The material calls this kind of thing social grooming. It can feel connecting.
Okay, but there's a cost.
There can be a quiet cost. Even sharing seemingly neutral information about others subtly conditions the people listening to wonder, well, what might you be saying about them when they're not around?
So you're revealing what kinds of things about other people you find interesting or safe or worthy of discussion.
Exactly. The key insight here is that even sharing seemingly neutral relational data reveals something important about you and how you treat other people's stories, even in casual conversation. It shapes how people perceive your discretion.
That leads to this reflective practice the notes suggest, the conversational mirror.
Yeah, this is simple but powerful. Just pay attention for a week or so. How much time did you spend talking about other people who weren't there? How much time talking about yourself? And how much time genuinely asking questions about the person you were actually talking to?
Because a healthy conversation has a balance between all three.
Ideally, yeah. If you find you're spending most of your conversational energy talking about other people who aren't present, it might feel like connection, but it can also create distance or, start to feel gossipy over time.
And think about the meta messages you send. Even if you never technically betray a confidence.
Right. People pick up on the patterns. If your conversations are constantly full of complaints or detailed stories about absent people, the meta message might be, this person constantly tracks and shares negative social details.
Or, if I confide in them, my story might end up as fodder for their next conversation.
Exactly. The powerful insight here is that people often evaluate your trustworthiness not just by whether you keep explicit secrets, but by how you treat other people's stories in casual, everyday settings.
So to make a space feel truly safe for genuine connection, what does that require? What are the practices?
The notes emphasize things like discretion, maybe aiming to talk to people more than about them. Presence, being truly present and listening when someone is sharing with you. Reciprocity, being willing to share your own vulnerability sometimes, not just focusing on others.
Intentionality, really checking why you're sharing something about someone else before you do it. And affectionate framing. What's that?
It means even if you share something difficult or frustrating about someone, can you still hold some baseline compassion or respect for them in how you frame it? It's about treating other people's stories, even the messy ones, with care.
Okay, so if you find that people talk is your default way to fill conversational space, maybe out of habit, the material offers some fantastic alternatives, ways to add depth without necessarily bringing in drama about others.
Yeah, these are great. What if you ask questions like, what's something surprising you've been learning about yourself lately?
Or what really has your attention outside of work or the usual stuff right now?
What's something beautiful or weird you've noticed recently? Or what's something you wish people asked you about more often?
What are you feeling excited to try or learn next? These kinds of questions build connection based on who you are and how you're actually showing up.
Yeah, not just based on who you know or what drama is unfolding elsewhere in your social circle. It shifts the focus inward and towards genuine curiosity about the person in front of you.
The notes also offer these concrete conversation starters to swap out the typical gossip fodder.
Right, so instead of jumping in with, can you believe what they did?
Maybe try asking, what's been weighing on you lately and what's been helping you navigate it? Something more supportive.
Or instead of the generic, ugh, work is the worst, maybe try, what would a job that genuinely fits your soul even look like? What would that feel like?
Going deeper. And instead of labeling someone like, she's so fake, maybe ask,
what kinds of people make you feel really safe and authentic to be around? Shifting from judgment of others to understanding your own needs and preferences.
you're not avoiding honesty, you're just elevating the conversation,
Right.
getting to a higher signal-to-noise ratio.
Exactly. More substance, less static.
And finally, the idea of cultivating relational rituals that build intimacy based on shared meaning or vulnerability, not just shared discomfort about other people.
Yeah, instead of primarily bonding over complaining, Maybe try things like those rose, thorn, bud check-ins. Share something good, something challenging, and something you're looking forward to.
Or having conversations explicitly about your core values, mapping out personal milestones together, bonding over art or books or music you both love.
Regular check-ins on shared goals, if you have them. It's about finding ways to connect deeply through shared meaning and vulnerability rather than just relying on shared negativity about others.
And developing the muscle of emotional curiosity. When someone is sharing something difficult.
Instead of immediately jumping in with your own story or your judgment or your advice, maybe ask questions first, like, wow, what's that experience actually been like for you day to day?
Have you learned anything surprising from going through this?
Do you feel ready to do anything with that feeling right now, or do you just need to express it for a bit?
Or that simple, powerful question. Right now, are you hoping for empathy from me, more of a sounding board, or maybe just a distraction?
Asking that directly can be so helpful. It helps keep the conversation focused on genuine processing and support rather than accidentally slipping into judgment or unhelpful advice giving or triangulation.
Ultimately, the notes seem to encourage us to understand the core need that's driving the urge to vent in the first place.
Yeah. Ask yourself, if I don't vent right now, what am I left sitting with? Is it uncertainty? Loneliness? A feeling of powerlessness? Anger?
What emotional need am I really trying to meet by telling this story about someone else?
Exactly. And could I find another, maybe more direct door to meet that need? Perhaps through mustering the courage to be honest with the person involved?
Or through creative expression, solitude and self-reflection,
Hmm.
or seeking genuine, curious connection with someone about something else entirely.
Right. The insight here is that venting is often just a placeholder for something else you're craving, maybe agency, belonging, safety, or transformation. The work is to find the real door to meeting that need.
Okay, there's one last powerful idea the material explores that really stuck with me. The power of not venting.
Yes.
And it's not framed as repression, is it? It's framed more as reverence, or maybe restraint.
Exactly. When you choose to resist that immediate urge to vent or gossip, especially when emotions are hot, it actually allows for internal integration of the experience. You give yourself space to process it first.
It preserves the sacredness of other people's stories, and maybe your own story too.
Yeah. It's an active choice that communicates trustworthiness, both to others and maybe to yourself. It's about waiting until you have something that feels true and maybe even helpful to share, not just something emotionally charged that needs to be immediately externalized to relieve pressure.
The insight there is profound. Sometimes silence isn't an absence. It can be the presence of intentional choice.
A refusal to let a story be splintered or distorted before it's ready, or maybe before you're ready to share it with care.
Wow. Okay. We have really taken a journey here, haven't we? Thanks entirely to your source material, listener.
It's covered a lot of ground.
Yeah. We've gone from just trying to define that incredibly blurry line between venting and gossip to understanding the different roles we all play: venter, listener, subject, exploring the pain of being the subject, diving really deep into the psychology of why we even do it.
And then looking at really practical, hopefully healthier alternatives and habits for navigating these interactions more consciously.
It's such a complex space, isn't it? But these notes, this material you sent, it's given us a remarkable map, I think.
It really has. And maybe leaves us with a final thought to ponder. Consider this. If you were to focus on shifting just one habit we discussed today.
Just one thing.
Yeah. Whether it's something about how you choose to vent or how you choose to listen when someone else is venting, or maybe how you choose not to talk about others when they're not around. If you shifted just one thing, what might change?
What might change in your most important relationships? Or even just in your own sense of self, your own integrity?
Yeah. What might open up?
That's a really powerful question to sit with. Thank you again, listener, for bringing this topic and these rich sources to our attention. We truly hope this deep dive provides a solid foundation for your own continued reflection and growth in this area.